check. Somebody on the interwebs and can hear me? Dun. Normally, if you can hear me, please write something in the chat. Then, do I have a go, Stefan? Good. Hello. Welcome to I'm rusty. To this month's .NET Community Austria meetup here at Sentry. As always, organized by .NET DevSat. Who are .NET DevSat? We are a non-profit organization here in Vienna, Austria, with the goal of sharing .NET knowledge, and we are organizing these events. You can find us everywhere: YouTube, Twitter, still Twitter, Twitch, and LinkedIn. And the clicker battery is dead. Yeah, thank you all for joining here on location, also on stream, or the people who watch the recording. And yeah, also thanks for Sentry hosting us today here. Cool office. And Stefan from Sentry wants to speak some words and give us a moment to switch things.
So, present, fair enough. Present. And the mirror. And you told me to hide this, right? All right. So, hi. I'm Stefan, working at Sentry. I'm an SDK engineer for the .NET SDK, so that's kind of fitting. And I'll just give you the conference booth demo, basically, where what do you do with Sentry? Why do you don't know it yet, but why do you need it? So the idea is you have your, I don't know, it doesn't matter, application, service, server, what have you. In this case, we have an online shop that has an ASP.NET Core backend, and I want to buy my lovely plant, but I'm having trouble. I'm experiencing troubles. And as a user, this is, I guess, the most frustrating thing. I was just willing to give you my money, and stuff doesn't work. So I guess I could reach out, but how likely is it that I'm going to do that? And how likely is it that I'm going to be happy about it? And how many people does it need for then? Like, who's going to get notified how that something broke? And how does the one that has to fix it know what went wrong? So this error, luckily, the backend had Sentry in there. And this is basically what it looks like. You start off at an issue stream where all the errors that are happening throughout your application's lifecycle, they get sent there. I mean, for the demo, we are well behaved, so we only have that one issue to make a point, because we don't ship any bugs like ever. But even from the get-go, you get to see how many events were there in the first place, how many unique users were affected by it. Is it that one weird bot going nuts on your website, or is it actual users having real pain points? And from there, it's just digging and drilling deeper into the actual issue. So the 33 users that were affected before, that was me playing around. Since it's a demo and we use it for conferences, it's actually 29,000 unique users. It happened a whole bunch of times. we start off with like highlights, where was that an handled exception? It was not, which makes it a bit more spooky because we didn't see it coming. There are going forward from there, it just starts getting deeper and deeper into the issue, where you have the actual exception that has been thrown. So you don't need to sift through logs, trying to find out where in your code it went wrong. You have the actual stack trace, you have the source context with line numbers. Since we have SDKs for basically any platform, we are able to connect front-end and back-end errors together. So the back-end blowing up had real consequences on the front end. And on the front end, it records the changes on the DOM. So the whole question as a back-end engineer, like what the hell did you even do to get to a point for it to break like that? You don't have to ask that question anymore because it's already there. Because I went a bit on about logs not being any relevant. Not relevant anymore. We do still have logs with all kinds of integrations with whatever logging solution it is they're using. We add those as breadcrumbs. Those are associated with your event. So it's not like you have to sift through logs to find the relevant logs for whatever happened. And then there's a whole bunch of extra and customizable context where some stuff we can't do out of the box. Like we can't just grab the request body and send that, because like that would be a bit dangerous. But you can add it, you can opt into it. You can get the headers, the environment, depending on what it is that might be relevant to you. There's probably a context for it. And if there isn't, this is all customizable. You just add it to your setup, and then you're good to go. The neat part about this is we really don't care what platform you develop on, or what you're running on, or what mixture of things you're using. We probably have an SDK for it, and it just goes deeper from the high level. So we support down all the way to ASP.NET, have integrations with probably you name it. The newest one being Blazor WebAssembly. That was fun. And the neat part about it is it's open source, so you're not bound by us putting on some money grabbing schemes on you. You can host it yourself for free. The repository is open source, so you can get to see the .NET SDK yourself. If you find bugs, please tell me. It's the most awesome experience so far working on the .NET SDK, where issue open up and like, no, please don't. And in the issue, it's already like deadline. You did it wrong. It's like super nice to fix. I'm super appreciative of like, thanks for digging through that and helping out there. Yeah, that's it.
So let's try to switch back. Problem is, where's my stream? Yeah, it's so short interruption. What the? We need some waiting music. So So here's the right thing. On stream is the right thing. Good. So yeah, thanks, Stefan, for showing us quickly Sentry. We want also to say thanks to our other sponsors, Tito Avery, Rubicon, for supporting us financially, that we can have the streaming equipment and everything. And also thanks to JetBrains, we have, as usual, 12 months product license to raffle. And how to take part, simply in the chat, enter JetBrains. I started it already. If somebody from the audience want to win something, the easiest thing is also take part via the chat in the raffle. And last thing before we come to the talk, next meetup. So we decided to make a summer break in July and August of events, and we will back in September with new stuff. We already have some ideas and speakers. Not yet in a state where we can announce something, but hope that we can do something. That start of August we will send out the first events for autumn. And with that, I hand over to, how do I pronounce it again? No, not sure. These are the bug cheeses for today. No, Jiří. Good, close enough. He's a member of the EF team at Microsoft, and he will show us today some tips and tricks for Visual Studio Debugger. Thank you. And your stage. So we see here some.
Good. Awesome. So again, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jiří, which will be difficult to pronounce, so it's fine. If you have questions, feel free to ask immediately. Raise your hands or something, or from the chat, I will get a notification from backstage that there is a question, because I have only one screen, so I cannot see that. As been said, I currently work in Microsoft as a software engineer in Entity Framework team, and before that I was working on the .NET Performance. So maybe after, if you have some questions about EF or .NET Performance or just general you want to talk, I'm all open about this one. But today we will be talking about tips and tricks and Visual Studio Debugger, because before I joined Microsoft, I was my secret force was that I'm not the smartest engineer in the room and probably never will, but I can figure stuff out. And debugging is kind of like figuring why something is happening or why something is not happening. And especially as you are trying multiple times to figure out what is happening, having all the different pieces in Visual Studio around might be difference between taking 5 minutes, one debugging session, to, I don't know, 1 minute, because you can kind of start the debugging session and go into correct place a little bit faster. I will be talking about the Visual Studio explicitly, not WinDBG, not any kind of different debugger or something like that, just purely Visual Studio. Everything I will be talking about is applicable to any programming language, any environment you are using. Obviously, I will be using .NET. But if you are programming in C++, the behavior is exactly the same, because it's about Visual Studio and the debugger, which is kind of abstraction between different languages and so on. But it's a different in VS Code. It's a different in, for example, JetBrains Rider, other stuff. But I'm pretty sure that, for example, Rider from JetBrains has similar features, maybe different shortcuts or anything like that. And similar to Visual Studio Code, which is a little bit less equipped with the debugging, because on Visual Studio, on full Visual Studio, there is like 25 or whatever years of Visual Studio and the debugger. So there's a lot of features. So I will start, and I will create a simple console app because that's all we need. Or maybe I will create it. By the way, I'm using DevBox here, so I'm connected to basically a VM that's available to me as my like development environment. If you are often switching between different projects and you need different setups and everything, definitely try or at least have a look at the DevBox, because that basically means that somebody else can create or prepare an image with all the tools, correct versions and everything already installed, and then you can start the VM from this image. You can connect to it using remote desktop. You can install extra applications and everything. It's basically VM for you. And sometimes it's also nice that somebody, administrator, can set up all the different security policies and everything. So if you are working in an environment where you need to comply with some policies, it might be a little bit easier to manage it like globally on all these VMs. And developers don't need to have their personal machines completely locked down for something, because then it's a little bit less useful for day-to-day work. And obviously, another benefit, that's why I'm using it, is that you can have like a absolutely average laptop, and you connect to this VM, and the VM can be, I don't know, like 64 gigs of memory, 16 cores. So you can program, for example, from your home pretty easily, pretty comfortably, because you have powerful, I know you can have more powerful machine, but it's still pretty powerful VM, and you can connect to it from anywhere in the world, and you don't need to have it with you all the time. And I like it because, for example, this laptop lasts like 7 hours on battery, and I can still do full-featured programming because I have beefy machine, and it's not eating my my battery. Obviously, the only downside is that I need connection. So if you are on an airplane or in a tunnel or something like that, then you are kind of out of luck. So I will start with something that's not really related to Visual Studio, but can help you set up your debugging process. And I will be looking at my notes, by the way. So when you see me looking like this, that's when I'm looking at my notes, so I don't forget about anything. So Visual Studio by default comes in 3 layouts. It's like default layouts that you can have. The first one, it's like the when the Visual Studio starts, is the one that I have here in front of me right now. And it's probably what you have normally in front of you. You can have a bunch of different windows and toolbars and whatnot. It absolutely depends on you. And you are creating the code. The other one is full screen mode, which you can get into from menu or Alt, Shift, and Enter. And that basically by default, again, hides all the different windows and everything. But you can customize it to your liking. So if you need something else in there, you can have it there. And if you customize it, it's kind of immediately saved. And the final one, which is really important for us, is the debugging layout. So if you start debugging session, Visual Studio will again restructure the layout of the windows and show you different toolboxes and different windows, and you can use those for basically accessing all the different tools that you need for your debugging. So as you can see, for me, it switches into slightly different layout. On the right-hand side, I have these diagnostic tools that kind of give me the overview of what's happening in the application if I'm doing some initial troubleshooting. And I have my local windows and immediate window and maybe call stack down there, so I see what is happening, where I am, and so on. But you can completely customize it. Whatever you do with the layout, it's kind of immediately saved. So if you start again, you have this layout and you can customize it any way you want. These 3 layouts are default. Visual Studio comes with these layouts. Obviously, if you are working, for example, in the office and you have like 3 screens and you are working at home and you have just 1 screen, you can create another layout that will be like office or home or something and have different windows, different structure and everything, depending on where you are. So you can add extra. These 3 are like default, and Visual Studio recognizes these 3 for whatever you are doing. So if you switch into debugging, it brings up the debugging layout, and immediately you have the layout that you are interested in. So that's the first part. Then some basic stuff about basically starting the debugger and working with the debugger initially. I'm a big fan of, yes. You mean like the font? I can do it like 200. The whole Visual Studio. You think there's something like to zoom Visual Studio? Ah, you mean that one? Yeah, I can do that. Let's do it. Scale. Let's do 125. That did absolutely nothing. 150? Maybe it's because I'm going through remote desktop. Hard to say.
Tell you to sign out first, and then
I don't want to sign out because that's going to break stuff. Let me do it. Yeah, I will do it in VS because I will be. Is that a zoom something? Probably not. That would be awesome. Yeah, just the fonts. Yeah. Then it's loading all the stuff that I can change, but then I can change only the font in the editor. Can I do all text to Windows? Which one it is? Environment.
then you say yes, and then you use the Segway UI,
Wow.
and then you can change the size to something bigger, and then the rest is bigger.
Nice. Now I need to remember how to put it back.
I can show that to you.
No, I will take another Visual Studio, export the settings, and import it into this one. That will be easier. So anyway, I'm a big fan of using a keyboard, especially if you're debugging, because as I said, I'm not the smartest one in any room, basically. So whenever I'm debugging, like 100% of my brain capacity is focused on the debugging, and I have 0% capacity to like move my mouse and think about where I need to click and everything. So I'm a big fan of keyboard and keyboard shortcuts. And luckily, by default, Visual Studio comes with some predefined shortcuts that are, in fact, mostly the same across all the different Microsoft products. So if you are using WinDBG, 90% of the shortcuts will be the same with the VS Code. And even if you're using other products, like, for example, JetBrains, or even if you're programming in different environments, quite often the IDE you are using allows you to select the keyboard layout that would be like Visual Studio. So once you know one, then you can kind of switch all the other tools into the Visual Studio, and 90% of the shortcuts will be the same. So the first one I want to show you is basically starting the the debugging session. Again, you can change it if you like, and if you're using different keyboard layouts in the Visual Studio, like if you for the first time start Visual Studio, it asks you like what kind of keyboard layout do you want. Obviously, if you're using slightly different one, some shortcuts will be different. I think the debugger one are same across the board, but I will be showing some other shortcuts, and they might be slightly different depending on which keyboard layout you selected when you started the Visual Studio for the first time. Or nowadays, you are probably not starting the Visual Studio for the first time, or when you log into the Visual Studio on a new installation, it kind of downloads your settings and everything. So maybe 10 years ago, when you first opened Visual Studio and you selected like Visual Basic, nowadays it's all selecting Visual Basic because it remembers the settings. But anyway, if I want to start the debugging session, I can just press F5 or whatever keyboard layout I select, and it immediately goes into the debugging session. Pretty easy. You probably know this shortcut, nothing too crazy. But then you can also immediately stop the debugging session. Like, I have all I need, and I would like to stop it. I can take my mouse and click on this button, and it stops it. Obviously, that's an option, and I see a lot of people doing it. But there's an easier one, and it's Shift F5. Basically kills the debugging session. But there's another one that I'm using quite often. You are in the debugging session, you went through it, and something is broken. Like you went through the for loop, you are over the index, and unless you have time travel debugging enabled, I will be talking about it later, you're out of luck and you need to start the debugging session again. And again, you can stop it and start it again, but we have like limited number of keystrokes. So any keystroke you waste is keystroke wasted. So you can restart the debugging session pretty easily using Control-Shift F5. That basically kills the debugging session and immediately starts it again. So if you messed up something or you need to start again because you changed way too many variables or something like that, you can quickly restart it and you don't have to worry about stopping and starting again. Speaking of the debugging session, sometimes, especially if you are trying to troubleshoot something that remotely resembles performance, you want to start without the debugging session. So you want to start your application and you don't want to attach the debugger to the application immediately, because obviously the debugger affects how quickly or what the application is actually doing. And what you can do, open the Explorer, double click on the exe or something like that. But from Visual Studio, you can immediately start it using Control F5, and it starts the application, does not attach the debugger, nothing like that. It just starts the application. Let me keep the application actually running. So I will do like console read line. So it's actually not closing immediately. So I started the application is running. And then when my application is in a state that I want my application to be, like something happened, or I don't know, I'm troubleshooting something, I can go into the debug menu, which by the way contains a lot of menus that we will be talking about. And as I was talking about the debugging layout of the Visual Studio, definitely go through all these windows and options you have in here and try turn them on, turn them off, whether you like the window or not. And one important part is, if you have the Visual Studio in a normal layout, there's not much. Like you go into the windows and there's like, I don't know, 10, and you say, well, that's pretty lame. Shouldn't be there more? Like the Visual Studio is, when you install it, it takes like, I don't know, 10 minutes to install the Visual Studio, or 20 minutes, depending on the options. Shouldn't there be more? Well, yes. The trick in this one is that if you attach debugger to Visual Studio and you go into the debug, well, the menu is a little bit longer and the windows is way longer with all the options that you can turn on and turn off depending on what you want. So if you are playing and trying to find the best layout and best windows for your type of environment, you need to first start the debugger and have something in the debugger. Then it shows you all the different pieces and all the different toolbars and layouts and everything you have in there. But what I want to talk about is, I have my application running and I would like to attach to that application because now it's like stuck, or there's an infinite loop, or I don't know, something like that. So if I go into the debug, there is a special menu that's called attach to process. And you can use this one to attach to any process that's running in your system. So it doesn't have to be even application you have in a Visual Studio. Sometimes you are trying to debug something and you only have the executable and PDBs and something like that. Or you are doing it for a friend, or it's a different version of application and you don't want to recompile it. This will open this window. It allows you to select the process that you want to debug. In my case, it's console @2. And then I can click attach, and suddenly the layout again shifts into the debugging mode and I can do what I need to do. I will go into that in a minute. I can obviously detach the debugger from the application as well. So if I go into the debug, there is a detach all, but usually you are not detaching, you just stop the debugging or something like that. A small trick that is available. Now, if I want to do the same again, of course, I can go into the debug and attach to process and select my process, especially if you are debugging some application that's kind of like a bigger one and you have multiple processes, or you need to figure out which process it is, if it's hosting multiple services or something like that. It's difficult to figure out which one it is. Visual Studio kind of remembers the last one you attached to, and there is a menu that's called reattach to process. And if I'm not mistaken, unless you've attached at least once in the current Visual Studio, this menu is not shown. So a lot of people don't know about it, the reattach, because you need to first attach and then go to the menu again, and this menu shows up in there. It's trying to be a little bit smart. It's not super dumb. So first, it tries to attach to the process with the same process ID. If the same process ID does not exist because the process already stopped and you restarted or something like that, it's looking at the process name. And if there's a multiple processes with the same process name, it's looking at the complete command line. So if the command line is exactly the same, it will try to attach to this one. If all fails, obviously it will show you a window and say, hey, I don't know which one you mean. There is nothing that it remotely resembles the previous process, so you need to select again. But usually when you are debugging like ASP.NET application or something and you are running it in a web server, it's exactly the same. It might even be the same process ID. So it kind of speeds up attaching back to the process. So if I click on it, it starts, there's running. I thought that nothing is running. It is actually running, so it attaches back, and I can do what I need to do. So speaking of the windows, obviously you are not beginners and you've seen Visual Studio Debugger before. So you have a bunch of these locals and output window, and you've probably seen those. I only want to talk about few kind of tips and tricks that you can use. The first one is the immediate window. The immediate window allows you to first evaluate something, some piece of code in the current context. So let me do some variables. So for example, now, and let's do date time now. So I have something in my variable. Let's put a breakpoint in here, and I will be talking about the breakpoints a lot in a minute. Now, if I start the application, I need to kill this one. I can, for example, call just now, and it will give me the output from the now. Maybe I should make it bigger. Can I zoom? I can't. Do we know how to change this one? Immediate window. Awesome. 12. Yes. Let's make it a little bit bigger in here. So I can do evaluation of variables or some commands like date time, now, I don't know, add days, 3, and it will give me the result. So if I need to call a function, check something, compare something, sometimes I'm using it if I have an if statement and there's like 5 different pieces of the if statement. And I don't know which one actually is false. So I copy paste the first one and evaluate it. Then I copy paste the second one and evaluate it. It allows me to a little bit easier see, okay, which one is actually false, why this if statement is not being taken, and so on and so on. So you can copy paste any type of code into this window. It will be evaluated. Sometimes the Visual Studio tells you like, no, I cannot do this because I need, usually it happens if you need to have some unmanaged code, like a native code running, or if it needs thread to be running. Then it tells you like, no, that's not possible because you stop the application, and what you are trying to do needs the application to be running. So it tells you, no, that's not possible, but yeah, that's what it is. But this window also has a small feature that you can use if you are doing something not that often, but you still need some menus, some settings, or something like that enabled. If you use this greater than symbol, then you can type basically menus in the Visual Studio. So if I do file.open, I will filter on all the different open menus that I have here in the file menu. And I'm using this one if I have some window that I am not using quite often, but I still need it, and especially for the debug. If I go into the debug windows and I need something, usually I miss it. Well, now it's not doing what I wanted to do. I go into the windows, it opens another submenu, and I, for example, want to see and this disassembly, which I know is down there below. So I start moving my mouse. Oh, it closes because I was not over the menu. So obviously I can go back in the windows, then really carefully go into the menu and then go into the disassembly. If you have multiple menus, like for example in the memory, there's another submenu, it might be difficult to get there if your hands are clunky as mine. So you can do the same. You can do, instead of file open project, you can do debug something something and open the windows you want. I have small notepad, small text file that I open in a notepad, and I have all these commands already there. So just copy paste them into the immediate window, and it opens what I need. If I need once every 3-4 months, then I'm obviously not having as my default layout, but I can open those windows because I know, hey, I need these three windows. Just open them and have it there. There's also a bunch of shortcuts. They are described in the documentation. So instead of saying like file.open file, which is kind of long, and it opens the file open dialog, I can also just type open. Not that one, that one. And this is the alias for file open. If you go into the documentation for Visual Studio on learn.microsoft.com, you will see a list of all these like shortcuts. And if there's something that you are doing quite often, you can probably learn the shortcut, and instead of typing like debugger.something.something, you might have a little bit shorter command for this one. So, final word about the shortcuts. Obviously, you can change shortcuts in Visual Studio. In any IDE, you can change shortcuts to your liking, but Visual Studio also has something that's called multi-stage shortcuts, and you've probably used some of those. It basically means you need to press some key combination and then another key combination. So for example, if I press Control and E, on the bottom, you see, it says Control E was pressed, waiting for second, blah, blah, blah. And now if I do, for example, S, which gives me, which shows me white spaces, it kind of kicks in. So sometimes I recommend to people, if you have your like own keyboard shortcuts, choose something like Control, I don't know, D or something, and then the rest of the shortcuts will be what makes sense. Because if you open Visual Studio and you start to changing shortcuts, it will tell you, hey, this is used for this is used for that, and then you are basically questioning whether, okay, should I change the shortcut even though I am not using it to something else, or should I come up with something new? And for example, for everything that goes into the editor, the first shortcut from the multi-stage is always Control E. So you have Control EC, which comments out the code, Control EU, which uncomments the code, Control ES, which shows the white spaces, and so on and so on. So if you have like a bunch of shortcuts that you are using, and you can kind of learn or teach yourself that, I don't know, like B means something and D means something, that obviously like Control B or Control D will be used for something. Then you can say, okay, well, my like modifier shortcut will be, I don't know, Control K, and then it's like A, B, C, and you know what A, B, C does, and it's not colliding with other shortcuts. So these multi-stage are quite nice, especially if it's not something that you are pressing like 20 times a minute, because obviously, yeah, you need to press more keys. But it's pretty nice because it's not colliding with other pieces. So you can quite easily say, hey, I need this menu, and the menu starts with B. So it will be Control K B, because I can remember it's B, and I don't have to hunt for some keyboard shortcut that's unused, or use some crazy ones like Control Shift Alt, whatever, which is difficult to press and difficult to, or might be difficult to remember. Awesome. So let me check my notes, but I think we can jump into the, into the windows that I've showed you before. And what I want to show is something pretty simple. Yep. So you probably have the output window enabled because it's enabled by default on clean installations. But what you can do as well is basically give you or like take different outputs from from NuGet Package Manager, Hot Reload, debug output, and so on and so on. So if you are looking into this window and there is nothing that would be interesting to you, maybe try this drop down and select something else, because it might be something that's failing in a build, or it's something in the debug, and so on and so on. And you can also filter in this window, and you can select what actually you want to see in this output. So for example, I have everything that's being loaded into the process, If you are not interested in this one and just your debug messages, you can disable the loaded stuff for this output window, so it will be a little bit cleaner and not like full of lines that you don't care about. So let's go back into, for example, locals or watch or any type of window that you are using to see your variables. Most of the time I'm using locals because that's what I'm interested in, but you can use anything else, that's just fine. A small trick, if you go over, well, I need to press, what? Do something, there it is. If you change a variable, by default, Visual Studio will show you, that's not what I want. Nope, that's, show you in the red. So especially if you have like breakpoint, then 20 lines of code and another breakpoint, it quickly shows you like, okay, these two variables were being modified because these are now red. So between two stops in the debugger, if something changes, it will be red in the window, and you immediately see, okay, this is what I need to focus on. The rest is exactly the same as it was 5 seconds ago, and I don't have to worry about this one. And I'm pretty sure you can even change the color again in Visual Studio. So if you don't like red, sometime, I don't know, like a year ago, somebody told me why it's red. It's kind of like an error or something. Can it be different color? Probably you can change the color, but 99% of developers will be expecting red. So if somebody else is on your Visual Studio troubleshooting something together and you have blue, it will be kind of confusing, like, why is it blue? It should be red or something. But I'm pretty sure you can change it. Great. So let's jump into where is my mouse? It's there, but it's not there. What the hell? Oh, I know what it was. That's fine. Let's jump into the breakpoints. Breakpoints are kind of like bread and butter of debugging. The idea behind the breakpoint is that basically you put a place in your code where the debugger should stop. And when the breakpoint is hit, debugger stops, you get a Visual Studio, basically all the layout and everything, and you can inspect local variables, you can change something, you can do whatever you want in the debugger. And you can add the breakpoint clicking on this left gutter, left, whatever is it called, margin, whatever, by mouse, but that's stupid because, as I said, I like keyboard. So the general shortcut is F9 that adds or removes the breakpoint if you are there. One reason why you want to have the shortcut is that, let's say I have a method, static void test, that takes some lambda, for example. Doesn't really matter what it is. And I want to call this method. And I do, something like this. For example, hello. And if I click on the corner here, it will put it onto the full line. But sometimes you are interested to have a breakpoint inside the lambda, right? So what you can do, obviously, is make it a method. It should be return and semicolon and everything. Then I can use again my mouse to put it where I want it to, but it's stupid. You need to change the code. Sometimes there's a lot of happening and it's not super useful. So what you can do, and you need keyboard for this one, if you have your cursor somewhere in the code in the lambda and you press F9, it puts the breakpoint inside the lambda. So it will hit it only when the lambda is executed, not when I go over the line with the test method. And it works all over the place. If you have something that's like multiple lines of code on one line or multiple statements of code on one line, sometimes we do have like multiple statements on one line because it's a little bit easier to understand. And again, if you put it by mouse, then it will put it basically on the first one. If you use the keyboard, you can specifically select, okay, I want this method or this line, although it's only one line of code. Then you can actually take the breakpoint, and I will be using my mouse because you can see it with the shortcuts. It's a little bit less visible, and you can disable the breakpoint. So instead of removing the breakpoint, if you are not interested in hitting it, but you still want to keep it, you can disable it, do something else in the code, or like validate your idea or something like that, and then you can enable these breakpoints back again and do some more troubleshooting, something like that. So you don't have to remove them. You can keep them in the application. If you see breakpoint that's basically empty in the middle, just the outline, that means that the breakpoint is not active. That might also happen if you start the application and you have the breakpoint and the breakpoint is active, but Visual Studio figures out like this breakpoint is never going to be hit because it was optimized away or something like that. It's unreachable code. It will immediately show you like not the full circle, but just the outline. So you know, hey, something is wrong. Speaking of keeping the breakpoints, what you can do is open a window for the breakpoints. Yeah, you can see it's pretty difficult. And it gives you the list of all the breakpoints in your application. So let me add some more. And for example, in here, so you can see which one are active and which one are not active. You can do multiple selection and say, hey, activate, deactivate, or something like that. Pretty simple stuff. And you can also take these breakpoints and export these breakpoints into an XML file. So if you need to save them for later, like next week or something, and you want to make sure that they are not lost if something is happening, or if you delete your .vs folder or something like that, you can export them into an XML file and then import them back again later. It's mostly working on line numbers. So if you change your code heavily between today and tomorrow, it will put the breakpoints on completely wrong lines, obviously. But it's at least trying to guess not only the line numbers, but beginning and end of the methods and so on and so on. So it's working a little bit with the offsets, but it's not super smart. Basically, if you change the code too much, you will lose the position of the breakpoints, and that's it. You need to start from scratch. Another nice feature is that you can put these breakpoints into groups. So I can add these breakpoints into a group. Let's give it a random name. And now I can basically enable and disable all of these breakpoints in the group in one go, either here in the menu or using a keyboard or something like that. So again, if you have different layers of your application, let's say like a backend and database layer or something like that, and you for a brief moment don't want to hit breakpoints in the database layer, you can put all the breakpoints in the database layer into group, disable that group, and you can start debugging and then go back and enable the group again back. Especially if you spend a lot of time, I mean like 5 minutes or something, doing these groups and enabling and disabling these breakpoints. It's pretty nice if you can export them and import them later, because sometimes the debugging session takes more time to like set up everything than to actually figure out what's wrong. So there's these breakpoints menu. I will leave it open so we can actually see what is happening in there. And each breakpoint can work in different ways. By default, the normal breakpoint, which is the red circle, means that it will stop on that line and you can continue doing what you are doing when you decide, and you can move forward. Again, I will show you a bunch of shortcuts and some maybe interesting ones that you might not know about. But you can also right-click and click on whatever you want. It opens exactly the same window, and you can add a condition to a breakpoint. The condition can be a so-called conditional expression that basically says it's true or when it's changed, and you can put any type of C# code you want. So if now dot day of week, or whatever is it called, day of week equals whatever, Sunday, then it will hit. Otherwise, it will not hit. This is especially nice if you are deep in the code and you have, for example, for loop. That's like the most basic example. You have for loop, and maybe like not if you've done that before. You are in the loop and you know it fails on like, I don't know, index 56. And you are there and pressing your F5 or whatever keyboard shortcut 55 times to hit the 56th iteration. And sometimes, and I've been there multiple times, you are pressing it really, really fast and you're trying to count. And instead of 55, you press it 56th time and you're over the limit. And it's like, oh, again, I need to start again. So yeah, now you can say something like, oh, not that, like I equals, not if, I equals 5 or something like that, and it will hit only on the 5th iteration or something like that. The only drawback here is that, first of all, it's being interpreted. So if you put really complex condition in here, it will slow down your application or your debugging session quite significantly. And I will show you a trick how to avoid that one. And sometimes if you call a method or something like that, so if you do like, I don't know, something stupid, doesn't really matter, console.readline equals, I don't know, A or something. It will tell you, the console readline is probably going to work, but it will tell you, no, you cannot do that. Because again, you need running application, running threads to execute this method. And as we are evaluating the breakpoint, we are actually not running the threads. So it's kind of like a chicken and egg problem. So not everything you want to put in here is actually going to work, but most of the time it's absolutely fine, especially if you have like variables or methods in your code, it's fine. It breaks down if you are debugging something like deep down in the runtime. And sometimes like garbage collector needs to do something and you cannot call this method and so on. So then it's slightly different and it kind of tells you, look, no, you cannot do that. So this is the most used one of these like conditional breakpoints. By the way, if you put a condition in there, the breakpoint changes its shape. Now it has a small plus in the middle. So you immediately know, oh, there is a condition and it's going to behave probably slightly differently. The other option I have is when changed. When changed is also sometimes called data point. That basically means you can put any expression or any variable, for example, now in here. And when this variable changes, when you're going over, then it will hit. If it's exactly the same as it was before, it's not going to hit. So if you have like setter and you are waiting for somebody to set a variable through a setter, obviously if you put a breakpoint into the setter, it will hit every time somebody is trying to set it. But if it's setting it into the same value, then it's probably not interesting because it's not triggering any issue. You can put this data point in there and say, hey, when it's changed, then hit. When it's not changed, then just like if it's not there, and it will continue executing. Then finally, you can have a hit count. Again, for loops, it's a little bit easier to maybe even have this hit count. You say, hey, when this breakpoint was hit 5 times or more than 5 times, because you can have equals or multiple, equals or multiple of. That's probably easy to do with equals, or greater than or equals, and it will hit. Again, especially for a for loop, you might say, hey, if it's more than 10, start hitting, otherwise I don't care. And finally, there's a filter that allows you to filter on something from variables, and we will see these variables in a minute. So that's the condition. Let me remove that one. Next one is actions. And the actions is really nothing special. It's also sometimes called trace point. And this trace point allows you to put something into the output window. And again, you can nod a little bit because I've done that multiple times. You are debugging the application, but you are really not interested in stopping at this location. You have the breakpoint there only to validate that the application hit this place. Like, hey, it's not sending an email. The first thing I will do, I will put a breakpoint into the method that is sending an email and run the application. And if it's hit, then I say, oh, okay, so it should be sending an email, but it's not, because sometimes the debugging is like, hey, this method is not even called. It's not sending email because it's not sending email. So that's it. So put a breakpoint in there, hit it, okay, it's validated, that's it. But if you have multiple methods and you just need to see, okay, was it there, there, and there, that it makes sense. Then having breakpoints, it's kind of like the application is running, Visual Studio stops, you press F5, it continues running, Visual Studio stops, you press F5, it continues running, and so on and so on. It's kind of weird. So with the trace points, or with these actions, you can put random message into your output window, and there's also a bunch of variables that you can use. These variables are more useful for like native debugging, like C++ or something like that, because there's like an address of current instruction and so on and so on. But there's also file position, which gives you a little bit of information like where you actually are in the output, and also the caller or call stack. So sometimes you are interested, hey, was it hit? And what is the call stack? Like, who is actually calling this method? So you can put it into the output. Especially if you're debugging multiple solutions that have multiple executables that are running together, there's also a process name that allows you to basically prefix your message with a process name. So you know, oh, it was from the backend, or it was from this worker, or it was from this service. And it's not kind of messed up that you don't know who was sending an email or something like that. And finally, there's a checkbox that basically says continue code execution. So with that one, it's really a trace point. It just puts something into the output window and does not stop. If you would want to put something into the output window and stop as well, you need to uncheck. You need to uncheck this one, and then it will just stop. And that's like a normal breakpoint. The next one here is that the breakpoint will be disabled once hit. Basically, once you first go over the breakpoint, Visual Studio will immediately disable it. Again, good for validation that something was hit, and you no longer care that it's hit again and again and again. But my favorite feature, and I've used it multiple times, is this one. Only enable when following was hit. So to give you a concrete example, for the last 20 years or something, I'm writing an ADO.NET provider for a Firebird database, including the entity framework core, and so on and so on. And sometimes I'm debugging something down in the provider, like I am sending some bytes to the server, and server is not responding or is sending me something that I'm not expecting, and I'm trying to figure out what's wrong. But if I go and put a breakpoint into a method that's basically like, let's say, sending an integer over the wire or sending a date time over the wire, I will hit this breakpoint like a million times before I actually hit my test method that's actually testing something. Because especially, for example, a method that's sending an integer, even for the initial handshake and initial authentication, we are sending integers left and right. Because, for example, the Firebird protocol works that if you have something that's variable length, there is a length at the beginning, and then is the content. So I'm actually sending a bunch of integers all the time. So if I put it into this low-level code that it's sending an integer, it will be completely useless, and it will take me like 10 minutes to get into the correct location. And again, it will be like, hit for the first time, no, that's the authentication. Hit for the second time, no, that's like exchange with the password. Hit for the third time, no, that's like opening a command. Hit again, it's like starting a transaction or something, like completely useless. So what I can do, and let me, oh yeah, we have enough breakpoints. So what I can do is select a breakpoint and see only enable once the following one was hit, and I can select any other breakpoint in my application. So what I usually do is I put a breakpoint at the beginning of my test method in my unit tests, which will be my like triggering breakpoint. And then I will say the breakpoint inside the low-level code will be enabled only when the one that's at the beginning of my test method is hit. So I know the initial setup of the test and creating the database and seeding the data and everything like that happens without the breakpoint actually hitting. And once I'm inside the test, I will hit the breakpoint, and it will be like, okay, you hit the breakpoint, so the next one is enabled. So for example, if I say, hey, only when this one is hit, I will close this one, you will see that now the shape is slightly different. And if I really go slowly over the code, oh, yeah. Still weird shape. If I go over this one, so now it was hit, and this one is again full circle. If it's empty circle, it means it's inactive. If it's full circle with some icons inside, then it means it will be hit. And now it's full circle, so it means it will be hit. So if I continue executing, it would stop when I would hit inside the Lambda itself. So that's a lot of stuff that you can do with, not the labels, with the breakpoints. You can mix and match those as you wish. So you can have trace points together with the condition and so on and so on. As I said, pretty nice if you want to disable it, that you can disable it, you have to remove it because the condition can be complex or something. Or sometimes if I know that I might need the condition again or something, I'm just exporting the breakpoints. It's a simple XML file, so even if I import it next week and it does not align completely, I can just copy paste the condition either from Visual Studio or from the file, because as I said, it's an XML file, and I know I will be able to kind of restore my breakpoints to the shape that I want and I will not lose something that I spent 5 minutes figuring out how to write the condition or how to do the dependencies between these breakpoints. So let me close this one. Let me remove all the breakpoints, and let's look into my notes. Yes.
Does the changed filter observe the equality implementation of the type that is used?
No. It basically checks the memory location. So whenever something changes in the memory location, it will trigger. If you want to have the equality, just do the condition like x equals something, and then you have the equality semantic. Right, so I forgot to look at this one. Yep. Yes. So what I mentioned is that if you put something into the condition, it will be interpreted, which is slower than compiled code, and that's the first roadblock. And sometimes, as I said, you put some code, and it will tell you, no, you cannot put this one in because I cannot do that while the application is stopped. So how to get away from this one, especially from the slow evaluation of some complex conditions that you can get. So my trick is that you will put a normal if statement with, I don't know, 1 = 1, which is really complex. And then you need to have like a breakpoint inside the code. And luckily, there is a handy class called debugger that has a break method that is basically a breakpoint in your code. Now, if I run the application, because 1 = 1, so it's true, it will hit the breakpoint the same way as if it was red line. And I can do whatever I want in my code. So I can have this one obviously saved on a disk, so I'm not losing the breakpoints. Or if I have some complex evaluation in there, it will be compiled, it will be evaluated, and so on and so on, and the breakpoint will be hit by itself. There's also one nice method, and it's launch. So you can trigger opening just-in-time debugger or other debugger that you have registered in the system. So now if I run the application without the debugger being attached, so you can see the Visual Studio does not change the layout into the debugging. Once my application starts and hits this line, I will get this like, hey, choose your debugger. And I can either attach existing VS or open new VS. If you have multiple debuggers registered in your system, the list will be a little bit longer. And you can just say, oh, this debugger, open it, and start debugging. So especially if your application is hitting like unhandled exception or crashing somewhere, there is very little chance that you will be able to pinpoint like what was happening. Like put breakpoint in here, and once it hits this breakpoint, I want to see what was happening. So you can do the other way around. You can say, hey, I will catch exception somewhere in this area of code. And when I catch the exception, I will trigger this one. I will open the debugger. I will see what's happening. And maybe I will be able to narrow it down a little bit more and basically like tighten my condition or tighten the place where I'm looking at, and hopefully be able to figure out what is happening in there. So that's kind of like the escape hatch if you have a complex condition and you realize, oh, it's taking way too long to hit the place because the debugger is interpreting the condition and it's kind of slow. So let me check this one. Yep. So a few small shortcuts that I see I have in this list, and it will be good segue into like multiple shortcuts for the debugger itself. These are not really related to debugger, but might be for debugging to basically see what's happening. So you probably know that if you press F12 on a method, that it will show you where the method is, how it looks like, and so on. If it's something that it needs to decompile, it will decompile. If it's in your code, it will put you into the code. And now my like full Visual Studio is in the code, and like, yeah, I need to go back. I need to see what's happening. I can close it by mouse or do like Control- or something like that. Multiple ways to get back. But I kind of lost the context of my code. There's one shortcut, which is Alt F12, that shows me the same view directly in line in my code. So I don't lose the context and I can continue looking at the code and whatnot. And if I go a little bit deeper, so for example, into this one, there's these dots at the top that basically tells you, hey, do you want to go back? So I will do it with the mouse. You can do the keyboard using Control minus. Or I can say, hey, oops, let's go back. Nope, I cannot hit it. Let's go back into the previous one and previous one and previous one. So if you like F12 into multiple methods and then you want to go back because you realize, oh, I need to check something in the previous method, you still can go there. Once you are done, you can press escape and it goes away, or close it with a mouse or some other ways to close it. So that's a small shortcut that might be helpful. Another one, again, not really related to debugger, but sometimes I use it. You press dot and the IntelliSense shows up and hides something that's below the menu. And you can again nod to me if you've done that before. So what you do, well, you press escape, you remove the dot, you read, oh, there's 1 equals 1. And again, you expand it with typing the dot. And I've seen that multiple times. What was it? 1 equals what? Oh, okay. 1 equals 1. And you go back into this one, right? Pretty easy stuff. I'm doing it multiple times a day as well because it's a little bit easier and my hands are kind of used to have the keyboard and backspace and everything. So it's probably easier to do it this way. But there's other way that I'm sometimes using. You can press and hold Control key. And whenever you have something like a menu or a toolbox window or an IntelliSense or something that's basically like obstructing your view of the main Visual Studio window, if you press and hold Control key, it will fade out. If I lift it, it's back there. And it does not matter whether you are holding a toolbar and you are moving it left and right or moving some tool window and you suddenly don't know, oh, do I want it pinned up there or down there? If you hit Control key and hold it, it will fade out. You can see what was there. Hopefully you can see what was there. Then you lift it and it's back there. Pretty simple stuff. For the IntelliSense, I usually do the same stuff. I remove it, I put it back there, and that's it. When we are on this one, I know it's not really a Visual Studio, the debugger tip. What you can also do is press escape, so it keeps the code and everything in there, and then do Control space, which will show the IntelliSense again. So you don't have to do the dance with like backspace, dot, and it will show it again. But in Control and holding is probably the easiest one, especially if you have some windows that are on top, or if you are working on a small screen, suddenly your Visual Studio layout is kind of messed up. So you can take a window, hold it, press Control, it will fade out, you see what's there, you lift it, and everything is back to normal. So yeah, some basic shortcuts for managing the debugger. Let's forget about this one. And let's change this method into something like this. Whatever, that's stupid. I plus j. And let's hit an int. So, and I need static int let's call this one B, and we'll return 2. So I will call my test method, and I will call A and B, and I will assign it into a variable. Nice. So now I run my application, I put a breakpoint in. Yeah, there's the read line. So I hit the breakpoint, and now I want to start moving my debugger forward. So the first shortcut that you probably know is F5. Sorry, F5. Nope. If I press F5, it basically releases everything. It keeps running until it hits another breakpoint. Then it stops and the cycle continues. That's pretty simple stuff. Another, I should remove the read line because that's pretty stupid. Focus. Another shortcut that you can use is F10. And again, this will be pretty much the same across different IDEs and so on and so on. So if I do F10, it will move to the next line and next line and next line. So now it will go to bracket, and now the application closes. So that's F10. Again, when I'm debugging, my hand, usually my right hand is on like this F9, F10, F11, F12, because that's all I need to manage the debugger and move up and down. Sometimes I need shift or control that I'm doing with my left hand. And I'm focusing on the code because that's what I do. Another one is, yeah, you know what? Let me first remove the console read line because that's pretty stupid now. Another one is F11. So it's everything F9, F10, F11, pretty simple stuff. If I do F11, and by the way, F10, F11 is exactly the same in Chrome. If you open the network tools in Firefox, it's the same in WinDBG, it's the same by default in VS Code. So it's pretty much like universal shortcut for managing the debug. So F11 jumps into my code. So if I'm calling a method, it will go into that code itself. Similar shortcut is Shift F11, which will jump out of the method. So I'm somewhere in the method, and I'm no longer interested going line by line. I just need to go out, Shift F11. And finally, I need to start again. When I'm at the beginning of something like this, like test, and then A and the B, what I can do is press Alt, Shift, and F11. Alt, Shift, F11 shows me this menu. It's kind of nicely hidden. Even the shortcut is kind of nicely hidden. And it allows me to select into which method I want to actually like jump in. Because, and again, I've seen this multiple times, and I will probably see some people nodding. Let's say I'm debugging this code, and I want to go into the test method. Not into A, not into B. There's multiple ways, but a lot of people would do F11, then do hopefully Shift F11 to jump out of the method, do again F11, now you're in the B, Shift F11, you jump out of the B, you press F11 again, and you're finally in the test. Sometimes it's even worse, people do F11 and then do like F10 5 times to go through the whole A and whole B, then you are on the top, and finally you are in the test. With this one, let me restart the session. With Alt Shift, I'm looking at my hands because I don't know the shortcut by memory, but kind of like muscle memory. Alt Shift F11 shows you this menu, and you can choose which method you want to jump into. The only problem, it's kind of my pet peeve, is that it shows you wherever your mouse is. For me personally, I would be more happy if it would show you below the code or something like that. Because sometimes my mouse is like completely on like a different corner, and I'm looking and I don't see it. But it's fine. At least up and down arrow works. And what I'm usually doing, let me do it again. I do Shift F11, and when I'm using this shortcut, I'm usually interested in the outermost method. So I just press up, because that will be the last method, and enter, and I'm in the test immediately. So I saved some like F11, Shift F11, jumping back and forth. So that's quite a nice shortcut for this one. Final one, and let me do slightly different scenario. Let me put the breakpoint in here, and let's run the application. So I'm now on the first breakpoint, and I'm like, oh, okay, I now understand what's happening. Let me check in here. So what do? You press F9, you put the breakpoint, you press F5, you jump into this one. Oh, I understand it. F9 to remove that breakpoint and do something else, fix the code. Pretty simple stuff, right? Well, again, in my infinite quest to save my keyboard shortcuts, there is another option how to do it. So I start my debugging session. I'm on this breakpoint. I will move my cursor to whatever place I want, and I press Ctrl F10. And this shortcut creates basically a temporary breakpoint. So it will run, and it will run to the place where my cursor is in my code. If it's inside a method, it will inside a method. If it's somewhere else, it will basically continue running as long as it's not hitting the place where I am. If it hits the place where I am, it will stop. Like a temporary breakpoint that I can immediately put in there, and I don't have to like add breakpoint, stop, remove the breakpoint. Finally, this yellowish arrow. Anybody knows what it's doing? It represents where you are at your code. But what you can do, you can grab it with your mouse, probably with your mouse. You can do it with a keyboard, but that's completely useless. In this case, mouse is like 1,000 times better. You can grab it and you can move it up and down. And if you move it up and down, you are basically saying, hey, instead of running these lines, let me do it correctly. Because I know I will be like a lot of showing stuff, but it might be confusing. Let me do this. So I'm stopped on the hello world. And I know if I go over the hello world, it will put hello world in the application. And then it will go over the if statement, that's basically empty. And then it will do the test. And sometimes in my debugging, I want to skip some code. So what I can do is grab this arrow and move it into some location that I'm interested in. So for example, in here. And now if I run the application with F10 or whatever, and go back into the console, there is no hello world, there is no test. I basically skipped all those lines because, well, I said, hey, you are in here, and suddenly you are in here. I don't have to go forward. I can also go back. So if I decide, hey, let's go back into this one, it will evaluate the condition. It will say, yeah, test, and I have test in the console. So I can go back and forth in my code depending on what I'm trying to do. And even if you're in a for loop, you can say, hey, let's do this iteration again because I want to see what is actually happening. So how we are on time? Still good? Can I keep talking?
Ten, 15 minutes.
Okay.
Or already a little bit over an hour.
Yeah. Okay. 5 minutes. Few final ones that I really like. The first one is nothing fancy. You probably know that you can change the variable in your locals, autos, whatever. So I have x equals 0. I can put 10. And if I put 10, it's suddenly 10. And it's also red because I changed it. I can do the same from the immediate window, exactly the same, but I can change it. So sometimes if you, again, my favorite in the loop, and you went over the loop, you can move your yellow arrow back at the beginning of the loop and edit the I. So instead of 25, you set it 24, and you do it again. Kind of saves you some time restarting the debugging session and so on. And finally, my last or second to last trick. Let's say I put a breakpoint in here. You can put a mouse over a variable, whatever, and it shows you the current value. That's not the trick. Now you can pin this value so it's always there. Still, that's not the trick, but useful as well. Sometimes you have like multiple items pinned so you can see what is happening in there and so on and so on. So now you stop the debugging. And given that the variable was ID in the database, like you're debugging something, oh, the ID was 1255. You switch into Management Studio or whatever, and you want to check the record in the database because the application is crashing on this record. So you want to see, hey, maybe there's a null, maybe there's something that the application is expecting. Let me check it. So you switch into whatever different tool, and it's like, oh, was it 1215 or 1251? It happens to me like daily, basically. It's some number like 1234 or 1243. I don't know, but it was kind of a nice number. And so again, it's like, oh, back to the Visual Studio, let's start again, and so on and so on. And if it happens to me like 2, maybe 3 times, first of all, I'm frustrated that my brain is no longer working and losing the bits and bytes so quickly. But then I use the pin stuff for this. And now, if you move your mouse over this whatever pin, it will show you the value for last debugging session. So especially if you have multiple pins, multiple IDs, like a user ID and order ID or whatever, you can say, oh, it was user ID 25, but in database, the order is user ID 17. So that's something that's mismatched. That's maybe the reason why the application is crashing. So now you can see basically the value from last debugging session. What's even more important is that the Visual Studio saves this value in your .vs folder. So if I close the Visual Studio and open it again, it will still be there. So if I need to go somewhere or do something else, or my Visual Studio crashes, Visual Studio never crashes, right? But I can still see the value even like tomorrow when I'm doing something else and see, oh, what was happening there. The only drawback, and I really had to ask in Visual Studio team, there is no way to copy this value. So if you have like a GUID or a date time or something that's really long, like some hash or a checksum, you can't. Because if you move your mouse, it's gone. You can try moving it really, really fast or something like that. No, you cannot copy paste it. And I really asked in Visual Studio, like, hey, how can I copy paste it? And they were like, oh, interesting. Well, you can. So maybe in next version of Visual Studio, you will be able to copy paste it. Now you can, but I am using it most of the time for IDs from the database. So even if it's like 6 digits or something, I'm usually able to figure out it like, oh, it was like this one, go to the management studio. Ah, I forget it. Let's try again. But because I don't have to restart the debugging session, I will memorize it sooner or later to get the value that I'm interested in. So, yep. That's all the time we have for this one. I have one special that's not related to debugging. So if you're listening online, you will not be losing anything. But because you came to see me face to face, which is something I really value, because I need to go and be here, obviously. Otherwise, I would do it online from my home. I have some extra information that I can share with you, and I will not share it on the stream because it needs to be something for you that you've invested the time to come in here. So if you have any questions, I will be happy to answer questions.
Wait.
So at the beginning of the video, you kind of showed this attaching to process. So I'm just kind of curious, does it have start a process and attach? Because I was in this scenario and I don't remember why or what was it, but I really needed start a process and then attach immediately instead of just attaching to a running process. Can it be done? Because I was quite sure that at that point I couldn't find it or whatever.
Well, if you start the application from Visual Studio,
I know
it starts the process and immediately attaches the debugger.
It was some kind of weird build scenario. I don't remember really why. So,
Okay. Yeah, there is
yeah.
I know how to do it in WinDBG because that's what usually I do when I need, but
Yeah, it's a pickle. It's one of those things that you need once in a lifetime, actually.
I don't know how to do it in VS. Maybe it is possible. I will try to figure it out and put it on my blog or something if I figure it out. I know how to do it in WinDBG because in WinDBG you can basically launch a process. Let me do another one. Launch. Is there something with launch? No, it's only performance profile. No, I don't know how to do it in VS. Maybe it's not possible only like in WinDBG. What you can maybe do, but that will be really an overkill. The Visual Studio, like the devenv.exe, has a bunch of switches on a command line. And you can start the debugger. So you would, no. Yeah, no, that would not be possible. Yeah.
Okay. All right, it's a once in a lifetime. I solved it somehow anyway. So
Yeah.
Which other questions are here? Someone stream? Nothing.
By the way, it doesn't have to be a question about debugger in Visual Studio. If you're interested in EF or performance, I might know the answer. I might not.
And again, we need waiting music.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's it. Let me know when I'm no longer online.
And
I will share something with you.
We have an outro also.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
So let's quickly switch. So if somebody still wants to get a JetBrains license, you have now the chance for doing that.
Should I unplug?
I think you need to
Yep.
on the YouTube or on the Twitch stream in the chat. So all good again? Good. So then thank you
Thank you.
for presenting today. And as every speaker at our meetups, you get two things.
Wow.
First, our custom coaster
Nice.
with our logo,
Yeah, 3D printed. Nice.
and a set of our logo, the newest version of our logo in sticker format in with the various
you.
colors. And all of people are here. We have also stickers for you. They are at the back on the two tables. Also, Sentry provided a lot of stickers. Yeah, so thank you all for being here, and thanks to the stream for watching.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for doing the driving here. Good. Yeah. Also, thanks to our sponsors, Timetable and Rubicon, and also for JetBrains and for the raffle. I'm prepared. I'm prepared for people who are often here. So we have the raffle, and let's see who is the lucky. Stefan, you also took part. Good. The best Mar from Twitch. Congratulations on winning the license or the voucher for a license. Please send us an email on this email address, team@.netdevs.at, and you will get it in the next days. And the last thing, focus never is working. We always want to improve these events, and for that we would need your feedback. We have prepared a small feedback form who are often here or multiple times. You already know it. It helps us a lot to improve the events and see how it was. And I give you some moments to scan this little QR code. And with that, see you in September. Have a nice summer. Bye. Yeah, but now we are going offline. Sorry, stream.
I can